Here's the thing. When a case starts to crack, it rarely happens all at once. It's usually one witness, one detail, one weird little moment that doesn't sit right. And in the Avery trial, so far, that moment might have been Bobby Dassey. We're supposed to believe that he just happened to see Teresa Halbach show up and then conveniently left before anything happened. Now the state's moving on to law enforcement. This is episode 14 of the Avery trial. Last time, in episode 13, we dug into the testimony of Bobby Dassey, Stephen Avery's nephew, and one of the key witnesses that the prosecution really leaned on. The Bobby claimed that he saw Teresa Halbach arrive at the Avery property on Halloween 2005 and said she was alive and well when he left to go hunting. But on cross, which is what we heard in the last episode, things start to get a little bit messy. We got a closer look at Bobby's timeline, and a lot of it, or some of it, just doesn't add up. He was vague, he was inconsistent, and honestly, some of it sounded rehearsed. We also heard about a disturbing joke that allegedly went down inside the Dassey garage. Stephen making some offhand comment about, wanting help hiding a body and Bobby laughing it off, which, okay, weird timing and kind of gross, for that kind of humor, especially when you factor in the fact that Teresa had already been reported missing by then. There were also some odd details about a roadkill deer hanging in the garage and a hunting buddy named Mike Osmondson. And even whether or not Bobby was really awake when he said he was. So much of what he said just kind of didn't sit right. And then there were the Zellner files. We learned something about Bobby's computer, some pretty freaking disturbing things. The problem is we'll never know if this would have made any difference because the state never disclosed it to Stephen's defense team. Cue the underhanded, dirty, used car salesman. Before we jump into this episode, just a quick heads up. If you're more of a visual person and you actually want to see the trial exhibits I talk about, head over to youtube.com/beachhouse34. Same show, but with video. So while you're listening, you also get a look at the crime scene photos, a majority of them, court exhibits, and all the different details that you couldn't normally see in a podcast. So in today's episode, episode 14, we're moving on to the next witness, and this is Lieutenant Brett Bowe, who takes the stand. Now, I haven't read ahead yet, so you're going to get my unfiltered reactions in real time. Let's get into it. And we're still on the same day of the Bobby Dassey testimony. He has just left the stand, and the clerk, or then Lieutenant Brett Bowe, is called to the stand. The clerk swears him in, has him spell his name, and the direct examination is begun by Attorney Kratz. Mr. Bowe, how are you employed? Patrol Lieutenant with the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. How long have you been so employed? 2 years. And prior to that particular rank, could you tell the jury how you were previously employed? I started with the Sheriff's Department as a jailer, became a patrolman, then a patrol lieutenant, patrol sergeant, and then eventually a lieutenant. What are your duties currently as a lieutenant? I supervise the patrol staff. Sometime after November 5th of 2005, did you become involved in the investigation that brings us here to court today? Yes, I did. When did you first become involved in that investigation? Sunday morning, the 6th. And would you tell the jury how you first became involved? I was contacted Saturday night and asked to come to the scene to assist with taking control of the command post. What is a command post? It's a central location in a crime scene that we utilize for staging and organizing the activities that we're going to carry out during the day. Are there duties, or were there, I should say, the week of the 5th through the 12th, were there duties in assuming responsibility for the command post that you performed? Yes, there were. And why don't we talk about generally those duties? We'll talk specifically in just a few minutes, but talk about generally what those duties include. The primary duty was scheduling and making sure that there was security around the property during the evening hours and during the day. There were also numerous large-scale searches that went on at the property or around the property, and we were provided personnel to do that, and then we organized that. The Avery Salvage property itself, that 40-acre parcel, were you or one of the officers responsible for securing that area, again, between the 5th and 12th of November? Yes, I was. Describe for the jury, if you will, the security on the perimeter, that is the 40 acres. We're going to talk a little bit outside of that in just a minute, but let's first talk about the 40-acre perimeter. Could you describe for the jury how that area was secured? We stationed an officer at the four corners of the property. One of the corners was the command post, so there were always several people in that position. And then we had an officer in the remaining three corners with a squad car. I'm showing you what's first been marked as exhibit number 79. Can you tell us what that is, please? This is an overview photo of a majority of the 40 acres. All right. I think we have a better way to show these today. I'm hoping, at least. Actually, officer, we're going to, because there's a couple of technical issues that we're going to do during the break. I'm just going to talk through this, and then after our morning break, we'll be able to look at some exhibits. You talked about the four corners, though, of the 40-acre property, and that you had people posted there. During what period of time were they posted? And was this a around-the-clock thing, or describe that for the jury? Most of the time, it was around the clock. During the day, when there were a large number of people in a certain area, we may utilize that security person to assist those people in the area because they really hadn't left that area anyway. At night, those people stayed in their positions through the entire night. And then, if there was no activity in that area, they stayed in that position also. We have talked about the 40-acre property. Then, let's go beyond that. Can you describe the area that surrounds the Avery property? To the north of the Avery property is State Highway 147. Running to the east of it would be Jambo Creek Road, and to the west of it was County Q. The Avery property is south of 147, and there's a small dead-end road, Avery Road, that leads into the 40 acres. Were you familiar that sometime after 10:30 in the morning, on Saturday the 5th of November, that law enforcement officers took control of the Avery property? Yes, they did. Was there a law enforcement presence or security perimeter set up outside of the 40 acres? Yes, there was. There was an officer at the intersection of 147 and Q that, when I arrived Sunday morning, was in place. There was also an officer between that and Avery Road. There is a road that runs north off 147. There was an officer there keeping individuals from coming down onto 147. And then there was an officer at Jambo Creek Road with the intersection of 147. There was also an officer at the end of Avery Road that was checking people in and out of the property. This responsibility for security, was that yours alone or was that shared? The security on the property was shared with Lieutenant Sipple. So the jury knows who is Lieutenant Sipple. He would be the dispatch lieutenant for the Calumet Sheriff's Department. Works for Calumet? Yes. County? At that scene, Lieutenant Bowe, who did you take direction from? I took direction from Sheriff Poggle and Investigator Wiegert and Agent Fassbender. And Investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Fassbender, what was their role, if you know, at the scene? I believe they were lead investigators. I know you talked about security or the perimeter security. Were you also involved of security within the 40 acres? I mean, not just the four corners, but also other security issues? Generally, no. If there was something specific, I would make arrangements to get people for them, but then they would place them where they needed them. You may not know this, Lieutenant Bowe, But how many law enforcement officers were involved in this search effort? Do you know? Total? Yes. I don't know. All right. Other than security, your other responsibility, you talked about coordinating some of the searches. Is that right? Correct. Which areas of search responsibility did you have? Anytime there was a large-scale search, we coordinated that. There were 2 large-scale searches inside the salvage yard, and there were 2 large-scale searches outside the property. There was also the Winnebago dive team was on the scene, so we coordinated that. Let's take them in reverse order. Talking about the dive team, what was the dive team asked to do? The dive team was called in on Sunday the 6th and Monday the 7th. They were asked to dive any of the surrounding bodies of water. There were several gravel pits or stone quarries around this property, and there was water collecting in those. So they were asked to come in and search those areas. Do you know what they were searching for? Evidence, anything, a body, any property that may have belonged to Miss Halbach. All right, and you talk about the surrounding property. What kind of acreage or area are we talking about? Inside the roadways that we're talking about, there's over 500 acres. And we did search outside that to some extent too. So were all 500 acres searched? There were probably portions of it that were not searched. There were some wooded areas that were searched with dogs, but didn't get the massive search that we did in some other areas. Other than the heavily wooded areas, would you say the other or the balance of the 500 acres was searched? Yes. By law enforcement? Yes, it was. The coordination of these large-scale efforts, like the dive team that you mentioned, who would you directly speak with? Would it be the searchers, or was there an intermediary usually? What we would do is we would put a representative from the sheriff's department, one of our deputies, with each group. We would break them down into 10-man groups. Let me stop you there. When you say our deputies, who are you talking about? Calumet Sheriff's Department. Go ahead. We would communicate with our deputies which area we wanted to search, if we were looking for anything in particular, and they would relay that to the individuals that were in their group. They would notify us when they were going out, when they were searching, and when they completed their search. So we communicated directly with the Calumet officer that was with the team. You talked about the dive team. Let's talk about the search areas outside of the 40 acres. I'm excluding the Avery property itself. And can you describe those large-scale searches for us, please? A majority of that was either open field or quarries. What we would do is we would take a section of it and we would send our teams out to that search area. They would then let us know when they were completed, and then we would determine which additional area to send them to. The dive team searched 4 ponds directly around the Avery property on Sunday. And then on Monday, they moved to another quarry that was south of Jambo Creek Road, and they searched 2 large ponds there. Were the ponds left intact, or were the ponds disturbed at all due to the searching? The ponds that the dive team searched were left intact. Were there other ponds that were examined? There were. Tell us about that, please. There were 5 silt ponds that were located at Redant's main headquarters for their quarry. They utilized those for washing rock. The water would run into one pond, and it would kind of go from pond to pond until it got to the last one. And most of the dirt would be gone, and they would pump it out and use it again. The dive team determined that they couldn't dive those because there was too much sludge in them from the dirt they had washed off. So Redant agreed to dig 2 of those ponds out while we watched them do it. All right. I think I may have interrupted you about the other outlying property searches. You said that they were open field searches. Then you mentioned the dive team, and I think that's where I interrupted you. What other kind of searches were in the outlying areas? Included in the open field, there were also quarries. There's quarries all over in that area. So our teams would go from an open field And then they would have to work their way into a quarry, and they would search the quarry. Probably half of them were inactive at the time, or even more, so they would cover that area. How many officers were involved in those large-scale searches, if you know? It varied by day. One day we had 60 troopers that were involved. On Sunday, when we did the initial exterior search, we had 30 officers accompanied by 60 firemen. All right. So anywhere between 60 and 90 people searching at a time. Is that right? Correct. And again, for how many days did these searches occur? On 2 separate days, we searched the exterior of the property. And on 2 days, we searched the interior of the property. All right. So 4 days total. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about the interior of the property. But is there anything that we have left out on the exterior? Any searches that you haven't described on the exterior of the Avery property? Other than the searching with the dogs, on the first 3 days that I was involved, we had dogs on scene. So we would couple those up with Calumet officers, and we would send them to different areas around the property and just have them run their dogs through that property. The majority of what they ran through, we searched by hand, again, later. Were those the search and rescue dogs? Searching for evidence or searching for body or both? Searching for body. Lieutenant, in front of you is exhibit number 79. Could you tell us what that is, please? This is an overhead photo of a partial view of the Avery property. And you recognize that aerial photograph? Yes, I do. And as I mentioned, I think this will work better today. I'm hopeful, anyway. The jury is now seeing exhibit number 79. Is that correct? Correct. And will this photograph help you explain some of the interior, or at least large-scale searches from within that property? Yes, it will. All right. How were search teams assembled? As I said, the personnel would be provided to me, be it state troopers or deputies or firemen. We would then break them down into groups of about 10 individuals, and we would have a leader for that group who would normally be a deputy from the Calumet Sheriff's Department. We would coordinate everything through that officer, and then he would give the people under him the information that they needed, and they would report to him anything that they found. I know that you mentioned law enforcement and some others, but what other type of individual were utilized in these search efforts? Volunteer firemen. Referring then to exhibit number 79, describe, if you will, the first large-scale search operation. The first large-scale search operation was in the salvage yard. It was on a Sunday afternoon. We utilized approximately 50 firemen. We utilized approximately 50 firemen along with at least a dozen officers and broke them into groups. There are approximately 4,000 salvaged vehicles on the property. We had the firemen go through the salvaged vehicles, opening the trunks and hoods of every vehicle. The first search was when? I'm sorry? That was Sunday. The 6th? Yes. What were you looking for? We were looking for a body. Referring again to exhibit number 79, could you show us the cars that you are talking about? Everything down in this area, up through here, around, it actually extends a little further back to this side. But these are all salvaged vehicles. There's a couple up in this area here. Were you present during that large-scale search? Yes, I was. And what was required to look in these vehicles? As far as what? To open them? Yes. The firemen used crowbars, or they used their hooligan tools that they had with them. And they would open the trunks and the hoods just to verify that there wasn't a body inside the vehicle. On the 6th of November, was every vehicle searched? That is, all 4,000 vehicles? Yes, they were. Was some method that you or somebody else developed for how you knew a vehicle was searched or not? The individual groups had crime scene tape or had caution tape. They would either mark the individual vehicles as they searched them, or, as you can see, the vehicles are in fairly big groups. One group would start on the end. They would work their way to the other end, and then they would mark the two ends with caution tape so that everybody would know that that group of vehicles had been searched. All right. What was the next large-scale search that you were involved in coordinating? On the property? Yes. The next large-scale search was on Tuesday. It involved 60 state troopers and approximately 35 volunteer firemen. They went through all of the vehicles again. This time, they were doing a thorough search of the entire vehicle. This is a different kind of search than on the 6th? Yes, it is. What was the scope of the search? This search, they were looking for particular items. They were looking for the license plates from Teresa Halbach's vehicle. They were looking for a tool. She had a toolkit in her vehicle, and there was a tool missing from it. They were looking for that. And then they were looking for any specific items that may have belonged to her or would be of evidentiary value. So they were doing a much more thorough search. And again, are you aware that all 4,000 vehicles were searched? Yes, they were. Exhibit number 79 shows parts of the entryways. How is it that vehicles could travel from within or throughout the inside of the salvage yard? Do you understand that question? You mean once they were in the yard? Yeah, talk about the roadways within the yard itself. Okay. In between each group of vehicles, you can see these are all roadways through here. They kind of work their way through the property. It's just a dirt road that you can drive on. There's a gap between the vehicles. You can drive through it. That's what they used for their roads. So it's no formal road. The roads could change depending on where they put the vehicles, but it was an opening through the dirt that was used to drive on. Are you familiar with the surrounding property, which is called Redant's Quarry? Yes, I am. Again, referring to Exhibit 79, if you could tell us where that is located. Redant has, let's see, this is the north on this end. Redant has an active quarry from here down, which would be to the west. They also had a quarry on the south end, which would be in this area here. From Redant's quarry, or from at least the access corner, the corner that would attach Redant's to Avery's, did you go to that corner, to that location? Did you physically stand in that location? Yes, I did. And are you able, or were you able, to see Mr. Avery's trailer and garage from that corner? Yes, you can. I'm going to show you what has been, or have you look at what's marked as Exhibit number 80. Tell us what that is. This is a view of Mr. Avery's residence from the south. Would that be near Redant's property line? Yes, it's actually his property. His residence is right there. This view is from somewhere in this area, I would believe. All right. Have the jury look at Exhibit number 80. Tell us what we're looking at here, please. This is the backside of Mr. Avery's residence and his detached garage. Now, I note that, and tell me if I'm correct or not, is there a grade difference between Mr. Avery's and Redant's property? There's a berm between the two properties, and then on Redant's side, it goes straight down into the quarry. It's probably a 15 to 20 foot drop into the quarry. All right. I'm just going to have you mark or describe these next exhibits, some aerial photos. What is exhibit number 81? This is a view, an aerial view of the Avery property from the northeast. It would be Avery Road coming into the northeast corner of the property. We'll have the jury take a look at exhibit 81. Is that a picture of 81? Yes. With your laser pointer, could you describe the buildings that we're looking at? By the way, let me put in a foundational question. Did you become, in that 7 or 8 days, familiar with all of the buildings on this property? Yes, I did. All right. Looking at exhibit number 81, can you tell us, identify the buildings that are located therein? Starting at the top, there's a fenced-in area in here. It's an impound area. There is a large shed in there that is an impound storage. I believe it's a metal shed. And then there's a smaller garage down in this area. It's also used for storage. This is a longer, narrow shed that was used for heavy equipment storage. Down in the trees here would be Alan and Dolores Avery's residence, and there's also a detached garage in there too. I believe it would be right there. This is an office area and a work area. We referred to it as the new office. And then there's another work area back in here that was referred to as the old office area that was used. Beginning your testimony, Lieutenant Bowe, you talked about a command post being established. Does exhibit number 81 show that area? Yes, it does. Could you describe that for the jury, please? The command post that we utilized was in this area. That's where we organized our large-scale searches. We also had debriefings there. There was also a command post located up here that was used by the investigative team, so it was more of a work area for them. Does exhibit number 81 also show an access road? That is, how you would get to the Avery property from Highway 147. Yes, it does. This road right here is Avery Road. That's a paved road coming in that dead ends at the property. And if you turn right on that road, where does that take you? This is a gravel driveway that runs the length of the property, and it would end at Stephen Avery's residence. Lieutenant Bowe, are you familiar with the corner of the property that not only has a pond, but from which Teresa Halbach's vehicle was found? Yes, I am. Have you look at exhibit number 82, please, and tell us what that is, please. This is an aerial view from the east of the southeast corner of the property where the pond was and where Teresa Halbach's vehicle was found. And does it accurately depict that corner? Yes, it does. I will have the jury then look at number 82. With your laser pointer, tell us what we're looking at, please. This is Redan's Quarry to the south. There is an open field to the east. The view from the east. This is probably a little more than half of the property. This is a low area in the salvage yard where a lot of the runoff collects into a small pond. There's a berm up behind that, and Teresa Halbach's vehicle was found up in this area. Does this exhibit also show the car crusher? Yes, it does. It's down right here. All right. Are you familiar with what would be the northwest corner of the property? That is the area where Mr. Avery's residence was. Yes, I am. And could you look at exhibit number 83, please, and tell us what that is? This is an aerial photo from the north, looking south onto the Avery property and the Redan Quarry that's directly west to it. I will have the jury now look at exhibit number 83. Tell us what we're looking at. Once again, this is one of Redan's quarries. This was an active quarry at the time. This is Stephen Avery's residence and garage. And this would be Barb Janda's residence and garage. And we have got about half of the salvage yard included. Does this photograph, that is exhibit number 83, show a second entryway into the Avery property? Yes, it does. Could you describe that for the jury, please? There's a gravel road that comes up through here that connects all the quarries and runs down to Redan's processing plant. There is a conveyor that runs along the middle of that road and then runs into the Avery property. Where the Avery property and Redan's meet, there is a passageway to drive a vehicle through there. You talked about security being maintained on 4 corners of the property. How many corners of the property in which security was maintained 24 hours does this exhibit show? 2. And could you tell the jury, please, where law enforcement officers were stationed? There was an officer stationed down in this area at the end of the road in front of Stephen Avery's residence. And there was also an officer stationed down in this area just before it splits to go into the 2 quarries securing this corner. I don't know if I asked this well enough when you described the purpose, but why were you attempting to secure the 4 corners of the property? 1, we had taken custody of the property. We wanted to continue that through the entire time that we were there. We also wanted to assure that nobody else came into the property. The corner of the Avery property that includes Mr. Avery's residence, is that depicted also in exhibit number 84, the next exhibit? Yes, it is. Can you describe what exhibit 84 is, please? This is an aerial photo from the southeast, showing the northwest corner of the Avery property, and then the outside properties from there. I will have the jury look at Exhibit 84, and if you would be so kind as to tell them what we're looking at. This is the same quarry for Redant that we had looked at. This is an open field. This would be Stephen Avery's residence. This would be Barb Janda's residence. And then we're seeing the beginning of the salvage yard. At least as to the west and as to the northwest, does Exhibit 84 show the surrounding or adjacent properties? Yes, it does. Now, there was something yesterday that we heard from Trooper Austin. It was called a deer camp. Does Exhibit 84 show that? Yes, it does. The deer camp is right in this area. Just for the record, you are pointing to what would be to the almost uppermost and leftmost corner of the exhibit. Is that right? Yes. What did that consist of, and what are we looking at, if you can tell us? That was a camp that Redants used. They own most of the land around this area, and they used that for deer hunting. It consisted of 3 mobile homes that they had set up for deer hunting or something of that nature. All right. Lieutenant Bowe, you talked about the different berms or the different grade around Mr. Avery's property. When referring to exhibit number 84, could you describe that a little bit further, please? The berm on the west, you just want me to refer to? If there's other differences in elevation that this wouldn't show, I would appreciate if you would explain that, what surrounds Mr. Avery's. There's a small berm that starts in this area, Mr. Avery's property. Most of the salvage yard is in what appears to be an old quarry. Mr. Avery's property and the rest of the residents were up on where the normal grade would have been. So there's a small berm between his property and Redant's quarry. The further you get to the south, the higher that berm gets between the 2 properties. Lieutenant Bowe, from within the 40 acres itself, is there also a difference in grade? Yes, there is. Can you describe that for us, please? As I said, where the residents and the buildings are, they appear to be on what was the original grade. As you go into the quarry, you have to go down hills into the quarry, and then you reach a bottom grade where it appears is where they hit the rock bed. So it all slopes down as you go south, and then it kind of levels out in the bottom. And then when you get to the south end of it, there is a large berm separating that property from the next quarry. What's the next exhibit that you have in front of you? What number? 85. Okay. Could you just tell us what that is, please? This is an aerial photo from the south of the entire Avery property. We're going to go through these rather quickly, but I'm going to show you now Exhibit 85. Does that show the entirety of the 40-acre Avery salvage property? Yes, it does. If you can just very briefly orient us, what are the 4 corners that we're talking about? This is the north. This would be Stephen Avery's property to the northwest. This is where the command post was set up. This would be Al and Dolores's residence. This is the southeast. This is where the small retention pond is and where the vehicle was found. And this would be the southwest. This is where the conveyor would exit the property. Does exhibit number 85 allow you to show the jury all 4 locations where you had officers posted throughout the day? Yes, it does. And if you could just briefly point to those areas. There would be 1 officer in this corner at the end of the road. Just let me stop you there. Would that officer be with a squad? Yes. A marked squad? Yes. Most of the time, yes. Go ahead. There was an officer down in this area under the conveyor. There was an officer stationed in this area watching the top of the berm in this area up here. And then we had officers up here at the command post. Now, other than those 4 corners, if you will, are there other access points? In other words, is there other ways in which an individual or a vehicle could enter this property? The only way for a vehicle to enter the property would be through the conveyor belt down here or through the main driveway up on the top. It splits. You can get down through the buildings, or you can come down this edge and come down into it. There's a fence that runs along here and is a pretty steep grade through here, so you couldn't access it with a vehicle. There's also berms that run down this side and then around the bottom and then up this side. I want to point out that he didn't quite answer this question, did he? He was asked if there were other ways in which an individual or a vehicle could enter the property. And all that he mentioned was about a vehicle, not an individual. Let's continue. To the west of Stephen Avery's, it does show a body of water. Do you see that on this exhibit? Yes, I do. And can you point to that, please? What is that? It's a low spot in the quarry where the water gathers. Okay. This is a good segue to talk about the weather that week. Do you recall the weather the week beginning the 5th of November? I wasn't there on the 5th of November. I was informed it rained through most of the evening. When I got there on Sunday, the 6th, it was cold and windy during the morning. We had a snow shower that came in through the morning, which is one reason why we didn't start opening the vehicles until the afternoon. Through the rest of the day or through the rest of the week, it was normally cloudy and cold. The roadways from within the Avery property, when you got there on the 6th, would you describe that condition for us, please? In the salvage yard? Yes. They were very muddy. They were covered in water. Some of them had as much as a foot of water on them. So we had to be very careful where we drove inside the salvage yard. For the first few days, we didn't take squads down in there. We would use four-wheel drive vehicles if we had to get in there or walk through it. I think there's only 3 exhibits left. Why don't you tell us what's the next exhibit you have? 86. What does that show? The aerial photo of the entire property from the north. So what would be the exact opposite of 85? Is that right? Correct. Opposite end? Correct. Now I'm going to show you exhibit number 86. Virtually the same view as 85, just from the north instead of the south. Is that right? Correct. You had mentioned that there were some searches on areas that surrounded the Avery property, including some gravel pits. Exhibit 87 and 88 are those related to any of those searches. These are photos that would have been taken inside of one of the gravel pits. All right. Do you know by looking at 87 and 88 which pit, or is that too difficult to testify to? Yeah, I wouldn't be sure. All right. Are you able to identify exhibits 87 and 88 or not? No. All right. We'll save those for another witness. What was your schedule? In other words, how often were you there, and were you ever relieved, and did you ever go home from that location? I arrived Sunday morning, approximately at 7:30. Lieutenant Sipple had been there since Saturday. I stayed through Sunday, stayed Sunday night. Lieutenant Sipple went home Sunday night and came back in the morning. I stayed until Monday afternoon, actually Monday evening. I think I left around 7:30 at night, and then I returned the following morning again at about 7 o'clock. So we were both there during the day, and then we took turns being there at night. So how many hours straight would you be there? And then how many hours would you be off? Generally, between 30 and 36 hours, we would be there. And then we would be off the property roughly 12 hours. All right. How long did that last again for? I left Friday night and didn't return to the property. Lieutenant Sipple had returned Friday morning, and then I believe he was the last one off the property Saturday when they left. The 12th? Yes. Referring to Exhibit 86, which is the last exhibit and the one that's shown, the buildings, both the residences and the outbuildings, who was responsible for coordinating the searches of those? That was coordinated by Investigator Wiegert and Agent Fassbender. Okay, so the cars and the property itself was your responsibility. Is that right? Correct. The buildings, that is, the interior searches, was the lead investigators. Is that right? Correct. Did you participate in any of those interior searches, or was your responsibilities limited to exterior or vehicle searches? The only participation I would have had with the interior searches is if Investigator Wiegert or Agent Fassbender required one of the teams from inside one of the buildings to move somewhere else. I may advise them of that or send somebody to assist them in moving, but that was my only involvement. All right. Finally, Lieutenant Bowe, I'm going to direct your attention to March 1st and 2nd of 2006. Did you return to the property on those 2 days? Yes, I did. And what were your responsibilities on March 1st and 2nd? On the 1st and 2nd, they executed a search warrant for Mr. Avery's residence and his detached garage. I was keeping track of the individuals entering and exiting Mr. Avery's residence. Is there a term for that? I was logging them in and out. Okay. You weren't involved, however, in any active searching? No, I was not. All right. I would move admission of Exhibits 79 through 86 at this time, Judge. Attorney Strang says, I don't have any objection. And the court says, very well, those exhibits are admitted. Attorney Kratz says, I'm sorry, that's all I have of this witness. And the court then says, Mr. Strang. And Attorney Strang then says, before he begins his cross-examination, says, I would like to start with Exhibit 85, if we could. And then Attorney Strang begins his cross-examination. Good morning, Lieutenant. Good morning. I have got Exhibit 85 up on the screen for well, I picked this one only because at least north is to the top, which is where we're used to looking at on maps. And you told us where the security points, the 24-hour security points, that's my term, not yours, yes. But you know the four corners, yes, that you described. Before I get to those for just a moment, you were logging people in and out of this whole 40-acre area from November 6th for you through the 11th or the 12th as well, weren't you? Yes. Are you referring to the entrance? Well, that's where I'm going to go. And when I say you logging, I don't mean you personally necessarily, but that was one of the tasks you were overseeing. I did not oversee that, but there was an individual logging people in and out of the property. Okay. And where was that done? Primarily, that was done where Avery Road met 147. There was a squad car parked right on Avery Road at the entrance. Okay. So although Avery Road, which runs north to 147, and 147 was roughly east-west at that point, yes. Although Avery Road is paved, it really only goes to one place. Correct. Dead ends at a cul-de-sac just outside the business entrance. Yeah, the pavement just ends right about in this area. And then everything else is gravel driveways from there. So when you, for example, would come for one of these 30 to 36-hour shifts, you would get checked in or logged in up north of this photo where you turn off 147, yes, to come down Avery Road. Yes, I would. The logging in would involve somebody visually identifying you and either you writing your name on a log sheet or the officer with the log sheet writing your name down. Correct. Now, once you became familiar to the officers keeping the log, that's pretty quick in terms of identifying you. We still had to identify who we were. The officers weren't familiar with us at all. And it was a rotating group of officers who were, yes, doing the logging. Yes, it was. Okay. And you weren't necessarily coming in uniform as you are today. I always wore my work jacket, so I had my patches and my badge. Okay. But even there, yes, we can see you are from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, but we want your name. Right. The purpose for, well, first of all, when you are familiar with that sort of logging operation, yes, I am. In fact, you did it on March 1st and 2nd. Yes. At the smaller area of Mr. Avery's house. Yes, I did. When you are logging people in and out, the purpose is to log everyone in and out, correct? Yes, it is. I'm sorry? Yes, it is. Okay. Now, and in general, if there's an ongoing search or law enforcement effort in general, The idea would be to keep the public out. That's one idea, right? That's one aspect of it, yes. And in general, another aspect would be to know which law enforcement officers are in. Right. The primary purpose is to keep track of who came onto the property. Now, this isn't to say that some members of the public might not be allowed in. I mean, someone who had a trade purpose or someone who needed to pick up medication, if there was some particular good reason for a member of the public to come in, somebody at that perimeter logging point either can make the decision or could radio back and decide whether to let someone in for a particular purpose or not. Yes, they could. Law enforcement officers, it's not so much that you are trying to keep them out, but you want to know who's in and who's leaving. Correct. Just to keep track of bodies and personnel and some control over the scene. Correct. Was that during a week in November, roughly a week in November, when you were out there Sunday through Friday, was the log check-in point you have described the only place that people were being logged in and out? Yes, it was. Now, let's go, as I said, to the 4 security points. Do you still have the laser? Yes, I do. Okay. The one at the northwest corner, 24 hours a day, somebody, and I assume they changed shifts, but someone would be in the squad car sitting up there? Yes, they would be in the area, either in their squad car or wandering around on foot. Yes. Somewhere close. All right. And the squad car, I don't know if you ever went over there to see this personally, but the squad car presumably would be parked near the end of that gravel road. Yes. Within yards, really, of the one burn barrel that stands, east and a little bit north of Stephen Avery's trailer. Are you talking the one on the other side of the driveway? Yeah, we have seen the burn barrel. I don't know how to describe it other than east and a little bit north, up in this area. Yeah, somewhere up in that area. Yes, okay. That's the general area where that perimeter guard would be posted. Correct. And then you did the other 4 corners. These folks would get out of their cars from time to time and walk the perimeter a little bit. They would get out of their vehicles. They would stretch their legs, walk around their car. Yeah. And overnight, 11 at night until 7 o'clock in the morning, in general, less active searching was going on. And generally, when it got dark, we didn't search. So other than folks at the command post and these perimeter guards, many of the law enforcement personnel on the scene would go home or go somewhere. Correct. And come back the next day with daylight. Yes. So I understand you don't know how many or what the total number of law enforcement officers involved were, but the numbers sound to me like dozens and dozens. During the day? Yes, during the day. I'm sorry. Depending on which day it was, yeah. It could have been something close to 100, a little above, a little below. I think 100 would probably be the max. At peak? At one day, yeah. In any event, though, at night, after dark, we would drop down to the 4 perimeter guards and then maybe a handful of people at one or both command posts. Correct. Now, if I understood you on the search assignment responsibility was sort of a kind of a simple division. You and Lieutenant Sipple were responsible for assignments on open area searches and car or vehicle searches in the salvage yard? Yes, we were. And then Investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Fassbender were in charge of assignments for searches within buildings, so to speak, on the Avery property? Yes. There were plenty of tasks available for people in either your area of responsibility or the area of responsibility covered by Mr. Wiegert and Mr. Fassbender? I'm not sure what you are asking. Well, I mean, there were a number of officers involved in searching inside buildings and then a number of people involved searching the open areas? Yes, there were. Okay. Now, at this scene, I think we know this, but this scene is in Manitowoc County, not Calumet County? Yes, it is. So this was an atypical investigation for you because of the location for a number of reasons, but specifically the location. I mean, you are out of county. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the roads. Right. It's atypical in the sense that it's out of county for you, somewhat. And you knew the reason for that in general was that a decision had been made the day before you got there to turn over investigative control to Sheriff Poggle, who runs your department. Yes. And then, of course, the department under him, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Yes. That your understanding was the decision was because there might be an appearance of conflict of interest involving the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Possibly. I was not in part of that discussion at all. Okay, all right, but you were told that Sheriff Poggle was in charge? Yes. And then Investigator Wiegert? Yes. And of course, Mr. Fassbender is from the Division of Criminal Investigation, not either one of the sheriff's departments? Correct. Okay. You were aware of a lawsuit that Stephen Avery had pending against Manitowoc County at the time? Yes, I was. A federal lawsuit was your understanding? Just what I heard on the news. I really didn't keep track of it. Sure. You had contact, though, with a number of Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officers during the 6 days that you were there. Yes, I did. And officers from all kinds of departments in the area, right? Correct. Two Rivers Police Department, Mishicot Fire Department, all kinds of different departments assisted. Yes. Wisconsin State Patrol sent a large complement of troopers. Yes. So this was a collaborative effort of a large number of law enforcement officers from a variety of agencies? Yes. You were aware that some of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officers, in particular, had strong feelings about Mr. Avery and his lawsuit? I'm not aware of that. Nobody voiced that to me. You didn't discuss the lawsuit of Mr. Avery? No. One way or the other? No. You met during your time there actually someone of your rank, a lieutenant from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department named James Lenk? Yes, I did. Had you known Lieutenant Lenk before? No. But met him sometime during that week? Sometime, yeah. He was in and out involved in this effort? Yes. You had also met Sergeant Andrew Colborn from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department? Yes. Again, he too had some role and was in and out at various times? Correct. Neither one of those two gentlemen told you, as one of the assigning officers of open field and car searches, that they had been deposed, had their depositions taken in Mr. Avery's lawsuit. Did they? No. And no one else told you that either? No. Did you meet a Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department detective named Dave or David Remacher? Yes. He had some role too during the course of these 6 days? Yes. An investigator from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department named Dennis Jacobs? Yes. Same thing. In and out? Yes. With some role in this? Were at any time were Mr. Lenk, Mr. Colborn, Mr. Remacher, and Mr. Jacobs in your area of responsibility? That is, involved in open field or car searches? No, they were not. Is it fair to conclude then, if you know, that they were in Investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Fassbender's area of search responsibility? Yes, they were. Had you been asked to give up a couple of your guys and take, let's say, Lenk and Colborn for open field and vehicle searches, you could have done that? Yes, I could have. I mean, to some extent, the bodies were interchangeable. I was provided with a group of people, and I put them in a place. Right. Yes. And I guess it was a poorly phrased question, but you were aware that there were some very specialized trained people from the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison who were among the people involved in the search efforts? I was aware the crime lab was on scene. I'm not sure what they were, what their function was. Okay, but you are aware that the crime lab has people with some specialized talents, whether that's fingerprints or, correct, trace evidence recovery, that kind of thing. Correct. Okay. If you now go forward to March 1st and March 2nd, 2006, okay? So we're not quite 4 months, but going on 4 months later. That's the next time, actually, that you were back to the Avery Salvage property? Yes. And this is the time when, in connection with a search warrant, your role is to log people in and out of Mr. Avery's trailer, his home? Correct. There was someone else logging people in and out of his garage right next door? Correct. So these positions, logging people, it's a fairly small area that you were responsible for? Yes. The idea being to be quite careful or meticulous about logging who comes and who goes? Yes. I mean, in other words, essentially, you would have a visual on the area that you are responsible for logging? Yes. While you were there on March 1st and March 2nd, 2006, you were in a position to see, and I think actually to log much of this. But you at least saw carpeting removed from the hallway in Stephen Avery's home? I saw them carry carpeting out. Yes. And you were back in the trailer yourself after the carpeting was removed? Yes, I was. I believe I helped them remove some stuff. Okay. So what you know is that the hallway that runs back to the extra bedroom and the bathroom and the master bedroom to the south, that hallway there had all the carpeting removed and carried out by law enforcement? I believe so, yes. You saw the carpet removed similarly from the entire master bedroom? Yes. Sort of wall-to-wall carpet that was just removed? Yes. You saw the mattress removed from the master bedroom? Yes. The box springs? Yes. And the entire bed frame in pieces? Yes. Rails, headboard, footboard, that kind of thing? Correct. Pillows you saw taken? There may have been. I believe they were bagged. And then you were aware in your role of logging the trailer that actually the wood paneling in the master bedroom or Stephen's bedroom was pulled off the walls and taken out? Yes, it was. All of it from that bedroom? I'm not sure if all of it was taken or not. I wasn't in there when they did that, but they took out several pieces. Yes. Okay. And I'm trying to remember if the inside of the closet was, and I don't either, but you saw a number of, I saw pieces come out of the residence. Yes. Of the paneling on the walls. Yes. Right down to the septic trap being removed from below that, beneath that residence. I did not see that come out, but I'm aware that they took that. Yes. You were not aware of what was going on in the garage? No. That was not your responsibility? No. Other than what I could see from my vantage point, I didn't know what was happening in there. Okay. Lieutenant Lenk and Sergeant Colborn were not in the residence on March 1st and March 2nd. Is that your best recollection? I don't recall them being in there at all. No. But do you recall them there and involved in the garage search? I don't recall them. I would have to check the log. Okay, well, and one way or the other, you just don't recall now? I don't recall. I'm familiar with them, but I don't know that I have really even talked to them much. Fair enough. Attorney Strang then says, that's all I've got. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And then he continues. For the moment, I'm not going to mark these 5 pages that I'm showing you because I don't know whether you will recognize them or not, but I will ask you. What do you say? I haven't seen them before. I believe they are going to be a login for March 1st and March 2nd for entering the property. But you haven't seen them before? I haven't seen these before. No. None of it is your writing? No. Or the log sheets you kept for the house on March 1st and 2nd? No. In fact, I'm on here. Very good. Was there a separate log point just to get on the property on March 1st and March 2nd? Yes, there was. So someone actually had to log in twice then, if he was involved. If you entered in the search, if you entered the garage or the residence, we would keep track of people entering and leaving those parts. But anybody who entered the property also logged in when they got there and when they left the property. And was that out again at Highway 147 and Avery Road? I believe that was down around Barb's residence. closer in because this was a smaller search area. It was a much smaller search area. This page on its face says it was cut by a Gary Schultz of your department. And I'm curious, is that form the sort of log sheet that you were keeping on March 1st and 2nd? This is the form that we used. These were actually created for our large-scale searches. The top has the group leader listed, and that's how we broke it down and kept track of them that way. We used these to log people in and out of the residence because we had them available. Have you seen this page before? I don't recall seeing this page before. This was kept by Officer Schultz. You recognize the form, though? Yes, I do. Same type of form you used on March 1st and 2nd? Yes, it is. The form, then, is kept in the ordinary course of the business of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. This was something that was created on scene for our like I said, our large-scale searches. Right. And when we came back, we had these left over. So we decided to use them because they were set up with the in and the out, and we could keep track of. Sure. And then the person keeping track of simply recording the observations he or she makes at about the time he or she is observing who is coming and going. Yes. And then you folks kept these in the regular course of the business of the Sheriff's Department? Yes. Okay. Exhibit number 125 is then marked for identification. So now that we have Exhibit 125, Attorney Kratz then says, Judge, could I inquire of counsel whether he intends to ask any specific information on that form? If he does, then I do need to be heard. If he is just showing the form, the kind of form, I don't have any objection. Attorney Strang then says, I have no objection to going to sidebar for a moment. Good Lord, sidebar again. The court then says, all right. And Attorney Strang then says, if Mr. Kratz wishes. And at this point, a sidebar is taken. And then Attorney Strang continues with the question. So we have the first page that you looked at, and then Mr. Buting was kind enough to gather up the rest of the pages of that. So I think we have got 5 pages now. Attorney Kratz then says, what was the exhibit number, Mr. Strang? It's 125. And Kratz says, thank you. And the court says, is this the first page been marked as 125? Attorney Strang then says, but I'm going to staple it so we have a complete exhibit. And then continues. Okay. And so there is no mystery. Pages 2 through 5 are just like page 1. I mean, it's the same form, running log, and page 5, where it ends, is a partial page. Correct. Okay. This isn't something that you recall ever seeing before, this specific document, or is it? Not this first page, no. The other pages you do, or there's one page, page number 3, where I have initialed off on it. That would have been a lunch break. Officer Schultz and we had a pickup truck parked between the residence and the garage. We stayed in that truck and we watched our prospective posts. Sure, okay. When we took a lunch break, everybody was cleared out. He took his lunch break, I took over the log and just verified that nobody entered, and then I initialed off that everybody was out of the garage. You had reason to know that Gary Schultz was doing the same job for the garage that you were doing for the trailer? Correct. Log, yes. People, yes. Into the garage, yes. And again, in general, I mean, this is a form you recognize, and you yourself used the same form on the same days, but for the trailer rather than the garage? Correct. Attorney Strang then says, okay, I will move the exhibit, admission of exhibit 125. I will just staple the 5 pages together so it's complete. And the court says, all right, Mr. Kratz, do I understand the state wishes to be heard? Kratz says, yes, Judge, but that can be after examination of this witness. And the court says, all right. The court will reserve ruling at this time on the request for admission. Attorney Strang says, and that is all I have. The court says, Mr. Kratz, anything on redirect? And Attorney Kratz says, just 2 questions. And Attorney Kratz begins his redirect. Lieutenant Bowe, Mr. Strang asked you at night if it was dark in the salvage area. Is that completely accurate? No, it is not, though most of the time we had a light set up in the southeast corner of the salvage yard. They would be set up down in this area where her vehicle was found. Her being Miss Hallbox? Yes. What kind of lights are we talking about? We're talking floodlights that are run off of a generator. So that quadrant, the southeast quadrant, would be lit up even during nighttime hours. Is that true? Yes, it was. And the final area of inquiry I have, Lieutenant Bowe, is the search responsibilities in your unit, that is, open fields and vehicle searches. Did that include citizen searches? There was one group of citizen searchers that requested to assist. We allowed them to search the open field north of the residence. They actually started from 147, worked their way down. They were told to stay out of the line fence along the edge of the property, and they were watched to make sure they didn't go near that. And they worked back and they worked their way back up to the highway. They never entered the 40-acre perimeter? Correct. I believe they had two representatives that came into the property and spoke with the investigators and myself. And that was the only involvement they had inside the property. Now, within the 40-acre perimeter, individuals who may have been involved in searching vehicles, did those include non-sworn law enforcement officers? Yes, they did. And did those individuals then have any specialized training, to your knowledge, in either evidence collection or evidence processing? No, they did not. Now, conversely, the officers who searched the interior, that is, those that Mr. Fassbender and Mr. Wiegert had responsibility for, was it your understanding that those officers required a higher level of expertise? The individuals that they were utilizing were evidence techs, which means that they have been specifically trained to preserve and gather evidence. All right. Obviously, a different kind of expertise than a volunteer firefighter. Is that right? Yes, sir. Attorney Kratz then says, "That's all I have for this witness, Judge. Thank you." The court then says, "Mr. Strang." And Attorney Strang says, "Thank you." And then begins his recross. When we were talking about dark out before, we meant the sun going down. Correct? Teresa Hallbach's Toyota already had been removed from the scene before you came on Sunday morning, November 6th? Correct. But if I understood you, nevertheless, you kept generators and some bright lights down in that southeast corner of the property anyway? Yes. The rest of the property was not similarly illuminated at night? My understanding was they had initially set the lights up where her vehicle was. Once her vehicle was removed, they kept the lights running at night. They would reposition them from night to night. Most of them, they illuminated this corner. Sometimes they illuminated out into this area, but they would move them around. Great, thanks. The court says, "All right, you are excused. Members of the jury at this time will take our lunch break." And then the jury leaves for lunch, and the jury is then not present, and the court then says to the attorneys, "You may be seated. Mr. Kratz, the state wishes to be heard on the defense request to admit Exhibit 125. And Attorney Kratz says, "We do, Judge. Actually, Mr. Fallon has asked for an opportunity to discuss that. Again, in candor to the court, we believe eventually this exhibit is going to be received, just not through this particular witness. We may be withdrawing our rejection, but we would ask to be allowed to inform the court of that after the lunch break." And the court says, "Oh, all right. We'll take our lunch break now and resume at 1 o'clock. And Attorney Kratz then says, "Thank you." So they take their recess, and then they all come back in, not the jury. The court says, "At this time, we're back on the record outside the presence of the jury. I will indicate for the record that before resuming this afternoon, I met with counsel in chambers concerning a request that had been made to the court from a juror for permission to ask a question. And it's the court's policy, at least in criminal cases, not to permit jurors to ask questions for a variety of reasons. I have prepared a statement to read to the jury when they return, and I provided a copy of that statement to the attorneys. And counsel, I just wish to confirm for the record that the parties are in agreement with the statement the court proposes to read." Mr. Kratz: "Yes, Judge." Your Honor, the state has received the court's anticipated response and we have no objection. Mr. Strang. Mr. Strang then says, we think it's a good response. And the court says, all right, at this time then, we'll bring the jurors in. So now the jurors are present. Nobody currently is on the stand, and then reads this statement. And the court says, you may be seated. Members of the jury, before we begin with the first witness, I have a statement I wish to read to you. The court has received a request from a juror that the court ask an additional question of the last witness. The court appreciates the jury's interest and attentiveness in this case, but in criminal cases, the court does not permit jurors to submit questions to witnesses for a variety of reasons. In our adversary system, it is the duty and responsibility of the attorneys for each side to ask the questions. Sometimes a juror may ask a question about evidence which is inadmissible, and the court does not want the jury to speculate about why a question may not be allowed to be asked. Other times, the jury may be anticipating evidence that will be introduced later. The parties have the right to control the order in which the evidence is received. To assist you in performing your important task, you are allowed to take written notes during the trial. At the end of the trial, each juror will receive a written copy of the court's final instructions. However, for the reasons that I have stated, among others, I must tell you that the jury will not be allowed to pose questions for witnesses in this case. You are to draw no inference for or against either party because of that restriction. Mr. Kratz, you may call the state's next witness. Okay, before we go any further, I just want to point out that there are no Zellner files regarding this witness. So there's nothing to add here regarding the post-conviction information. But let's talk about what we did here. So that was Lieutenant Brett Bowe on the stand. And on the surface, as it began, it might have just felt like another officer, right? Walking us through protocol. What the defense, though, did, and what they were doing here, was a little more strategic. They were laying groundwork. They were trying to poke holes in the idea that the salvage yard was sealed up tight and that everything was fully controlled and secure. And spoiler alert, it wasn't. He talked about how the property was divided into 4 quadrants, right? With officers stationed at each corner. Sounds good, right? Except when Strang, the defense, asked if someone or even a vehicle could have gotten in or out without being seen, there was an answer on a vehicle, but not an answer on an individual. And that says a lot, because if there were gaps in the surveillance, then how can anyone confidently claim that nothing shady happened on that property when nobody was paying any attention? Now, something else that came up that I really want to talk about because it matters, maybe more than people realize. 2 officers from Manitowoc County, this was James Lenk and Andrew Colborn, they had already given depositions in Stephen Avery's civil lawsuit against the county before any of this happened that we're hearing about. This lawsuit, or that lawsuit, was a $36 million case that was tied to Stephen Avery's wrongful conviction, where he spent 18 years in prison and DNA eventually cleared him. So what does this mean that these officers had their depositions taken? Well, it means they had already testified under oath about their roles and their knowledge and their actions or inactions in that earlier case. They were a part of a legal process where Avery was actively suing their department. Then suddenly, just as that lawsuit is heating up, they just gave their depositions, Avery becomes the main suspect in a brand new murder investigation. And those same officers are back involved in this case. That's not just coincidence, that's a conflict of interest. Because when someone's already testified in a case that could cost their department millions of dollars, and then they're called in to collect evidence in a case that could undermine that very lawsuit, come on. That's not clean. That's not neutral. That's messy as hell. And just to clarify, Mark Wiegert, we hear this name a lot in this episode, and we'll hear it more. The investigator we keep hearing about is with Calumet County, not Manitowoc County. But this other guy, David Remiger, he's Manitowoc. So there's overlap. And that overlap is weird, especially when we're being told that this whole investigation was kept clean by assigning it to a different jurisdiction. It's not that simple. So here's what I'm wondering. If the perimeter wasn't fully secure, if someone could have entered or exited unnoticed, and if key players from a lawsuit that could have rocked Manitowoc County were involved in gathering evidence, how much of what we're seeing was actually controlled and how much was manipulated? This case is getting muddier by the minute. And I don't know about you, but I'm not buying that every officer involved here was just doing their job with no bias, not after what we've heard. In the next episode, we're going to hear from there's going to be 3 witnesses, 3 more law enforcement witnesses. And yep, they're all from Manitowoc County. First up is Deputy Peter O'Connor from the Patrol Division. He was the very first law enforcement officer on the Avery property after Teresa's RAV4 was found on November 5th. Then we'll hear from Sergeant Jason Orth. He's also from Manitowoc. And he happened to be the first officer to speak with Pam Sturm after she found the Toyota. And finally, Deputy Inspector Todd Hermann, who is a patrol lieutenant or was a patrol lieutenant in 2005, and who was directly involved in identifying the Toyota that day. That's a lot of Manitowoc County for a case that was supposedly supposed to be handled by Calumet. So yeah, I've got questions. If this episode stuck with you, made you think, or pulled you deeper into the story, consider leaving a tip over at ko-fi.com/beachhouse34. It's a very simple way to support the hours of research and production that go into making the series what it is. I appreciate you all being here. We'll talk really soon. Bye for now.